This story explores themes of isolation and psychological distress. Listener discretion is advised. The silence was the first thing, not the gentle hum of a sleeping city, but an absolute suffocating void. It was too heavy, too complete for 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember looking at my alarm clock, then out the window. My street, usually a bustling artery of morning commutes and hurried footsteps, was utterly, impossibly still. No cars, no joggers, not even a stray dog chasing a squirrel. Just rows of parked vehicles, dark windows staring back like vacant eyes. A chill, colder than the morning air, snaked down my spine. I threw on clothes, my heart hammering against my ribs, and ventured outside. The air was crisp, clean, and terrifyingly silent. Not a single soul. My entire neighborhood, usually alive with the symphony of dawn, was a ghost town. It was just me, and the terrifying question that echoed in the profound emptiness: where was everyone? The sickening realization hit me like a physical blow. My breath hitched, a jagged, painful gasp in the suffocating quiet. Sarah, Emily, they had to be here. They just had to be. My mind, a frantic squirrel in a cage, raced through every possibility, every rational explanation. Maybe they'd gone for an early walk? But Sarah never left without her morning coffee, and Emily, my spirited 6-year-old, wouldn't miss her cartoons for anything. Not without waking me first, demanding I make her special blueberry pancakes. I stumbled back into the house, my heart hammering against my ribs, a wild drum in the cavernous silence. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of my clothes, sounded amplified, alien. The kitchen was exactly as we'd left it last night, or rather, as Sarah had left it this morning. Her favorite mug, half filled with lukewarm coffee, sat on the counter next to an open cookbook, a page dog-eared for a new recipe. A half-eaten piece of toast lay abandoned on a plate. This wasn't a planned departure. This was an interruption. Sarah! I yelled, my voice cracking, swallowed instantly by the oppressive quiet. It felt wrong, too loud, too desperate. Emily, are you here? No answer. Only the echo of my own fear. I raced through the downstairs, checking the living room, the small office, even the pantry, as if they might be hiding. Nothing. The silence followed me, a relentless shadow. Upstairs, the dread intensified. Emily's bedroom door was ajar. Her bed, a colorful mess of unicorn blankets, was empty. A half-finished drawing of a rainbow and a stick figure family lay on her small art table, crayons scattered around it. The window was closed, the curtains slightly parted, letting in the pale morning light that now seemed mocking in its normalcy. My daughter, usually a whirlwind of energy, was gone. Next, our bedroom. The duvet was thrown back on Sarah's side, a clear indentation where she'd been sleeping just hours ago. Her phone charger was plugged in, but her phone was missing. My own phone lay on my nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the screen. No signal. Not even an emergency call option. Just a blank, terrifying bar. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my rational mind. This wasn't right. This wasn't a dream. This was real. I tried the landline. Dead. No dial tone, just a flat, lifeless hum. The internet router lights were off. I tried the TV, the remote clicking uselessly. Nothing. No static, no channels, just a black screen reflecting my own terrified face. I even turned on the old battery-powered radio in the garage, hoping for some emergency broadcast, some explanation. Only white noise, a hiss that sounded like the whisper of a million ghosts. The world had gone silent. And dark. I had to get out. I had to see. My legs, heavy with a leaden fear, carried me back outside. The air was still crisp, clean, and utterly silent. The sun, climbing higher, cast long, eerie shadows across the deserted street. David and Jessica's house next door, usually marked by David's meticulously mowed lawn and Jessica's vibrant flower beds, was unnervingly still. Their garage door was slightly ajar, a bicycle leaning against the wall inside, a child's scooter lying on its side in the driveway. Signs of life, but no actual life. I walked up their driveway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. David? Jessica? My voice was barely a whisper now, as if afraid to break the profound quiet. I knocked on their front door, a tentative tap that sounded thunderous in the emptiness. No answer. I tried the handle. Unlocked. A cold shiver ran down my spine. David was obsessive about security. He never left his door unlocked. I pushed it open slowly, peering inside. The house was immaculate, almost too perfect. A half-finished puzzle lay on the coffee table. A child's backpack sat by the door, ready for school. The smell of freshly brewing coffee still lingered faintly in the air. A cruel phantom of normalcy. Everything was in its place, yet everyone was gone. Just like my house. Just like my family. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a fire. This was something else. Something far more terrifying. I backed away slowly, the image of that untouched coffee and the waiting backpack seared into my mind. I checked the next house and the next. Same story. Open doors, abandoned belongings, the chilling absence of human presence. A child's swing set swayed gently in the breeze in one yard. A solitary melancholy motion. A newspaper lay on a porch, its headlines screaming about local politics, oblivious to the void that had swallowed its readers. The silence began to press in on me, a tangible weight. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of life. No birds chirping, no distant traffic, no dogs barking, no rustle of leaves in the wind. The world felt muted, as if a giant hand had pressed a cosmic mute button on everything but my own ragged breathing and the frantic pulse in my ears. I started to run, a desperate, senseless sprint down the middle of the street, past rows of identical empty houses. I needed to see more. I needed to find a clue, a person, anything to break this horrifying spell. I ran until my lungs burned, until sweat stung my eyes, until the sheer, crushing weight of the emptiness threatened to buckle my knees. I reached the end of my street, turning onto Main Street, the main artery of our small town. My breath caught in my throat. It was worse here. So much worse. Cars, hundreds of them, were stopped haphazardly in the middle of the road. Some with doors flung open, others with keys still in the ignition. A delivery truck stood idling, its engine a low, lonely rumble, the only sound I'd heard besides my own footsteps and the distant hum of David and Jessica's garage door. Its cargo door was open, boxes spilling onto the pavement. A forgotten cell phone lay face down on the dashboard of a parked SUV, its screen dark. A purse sat on a bench outside the local coffee shop, spilled contents scattered around it, lipstick, a wallet, a pair of sunglasses. It was as if life had simply paused. Mid-sentence. Mid-action. Everyone gone. The downtown square, usually bustling with early morning commuters and dog walkers, was a vast, desolate expanse. The fountain in its center still gurgled, a lonely, defiant sound in the profound quiet, its water sparkling in the morning sun. But there was no one to admire it. No one to sit on the benches, no one to rush past, coffee in hand. The world was a stage, perfectly set, but with no actors. I stood there, in the absolute center of our town, surrounded by the silent, frozen tableau of an abandoned civilization. The sun was fully up now, casting a bright, indifferent light on the terrifying scene. My skin crawled with a primal fear I'd never known. This wasn't a local incident. This wasn't a neighborhood trick. This was global, or at least citywide. The question that had echoed in my neighborhood now screamed in the profound emptiness of Main Street. A chilling, undeniable truth. I was truly, utterly alone. The profound emptiness of Main Street wasn't just a sight. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The scream of undeniable truth. I was truly, utterly alone. Reverberated not just in my ears, but in the very core of my being. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, fractured under the force of it. This wasn't a nightmare. It was reality, cold and absolute. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone. No signal. Of course, I'd seen that at home, but I'd clung to the hope that it was just a localized outage, a glitch in my specific neighborhood's service. Now, standing amidst the silent monuments of commerce and communication, the truth was undeniable. My phone, a portal to the world, was a useless slab of metal and glass. Panic, a cold wave, washed over me, threatening to drag me under. I fought it, pushing it back with a desperate surge of adrenaline. There had to be an explanation. There had to be someone. This wasn't just a disappearance, it was an erasure. I started walking, not with purpose, but with a frantic energy, my eyes darting from storefront to storefront. The doors of a bustling coffee shop, the daily grind, stood ajar. A half-empty cup still steaming faintly on a counter inside. A laptop sat open on a table, its screen dark. It was as if time had simply paused. No signs of struggle, no overturned chairs, no shattered glass. Just stillness. Perfect, terrifying stillness. Across the street, a newsstand lay abandoned, newspapers fanned out, headlines screaming about local politics and sports. Yesterday's news. No mention of a sudden global vanishing act. The irony felt like a cruel joke. My stomach churned, a hollow ache that had nothing to do with hunger. I needed to confirm. I needed to know. I thought of places that were always busy, always full of life, even late at night. The city's main train station, the central hospital, the police headquarters. I hailed a taxi instinctively before remembering. The taxi was empty, its rear door slightly ajar. A briefcase lying on the back seat. Another perfectly preserved snapshot of a world that had ceased to be. I tried the driver's side door. Unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. The engine was off. A new, unsettling thought began to form. If everyone had vanished, why were their vehicles left behind? Why weren't there massive pileups? Cars crashing into each other as drivers disappeared mid-journey. It implied a simultaneous, instantaneous event. As if, at a specific moment, every single person simply ceased to exist. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the horrifying image. That was too much. It defied every law of physics, every understanding of reality. My mind recoiled from it, desperately seeking a more mundane, albeit terrifying, alternative. I got into the taxi. My hands gripped the steering wheel, slick with sweat. I hadn't driven a car in years, relying on public transport in the city. But now it was my only option. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. A jarring sound in the oppressive silence. The sudden noise made me jump, my heart hammering against my ribs. I put the car in drive, cautiously pulling away from the curb. The streets were eerily clear. No traffic lights were working, but there was no traffic to regulate. I drove slowly, watching for any sign of life, any movement, anything to contradict the terrifying truth. The journey to the police headquarters felt like traversing a ghost town. Storefronts flashed by, each one a silent testament to a vanished populace. A children's toy store with bright, cheerful displays. A bustling restaurant with tables set for dinner. A cinema with posters for upcoming blockbusters. All frozen in time. I reached the precinct. The glass doors were unlocked, swinging inward with a faint creak. The waiting room was empty, the fluorescent lights humming softly overhead. A half-eaten donut lay on a desk, next to a mug with a faded police logo. A computer monitor displayed a screensaver, tiny bubbles floating across the dark screen. Hello. My voice cracked, a pathetic whisper swallowed by the cavernous silence. Is anyone here? No answer. Only the hum of the lights, the faint whir of a computer fan. I walked through the deserted offices, past rows of empty desks. Each one was a tableau of interrupted work. A pen uncapped, a file open, a chair pushed back as if its occupant had just stepped away for a moment. I found the dispatch room. A bank of monitors displayed static or blank screens. The radio crackled faintly, an empty, hollow sound. I tried the main console, hitting buttons, turning dials. Nothing. No response. The communication lines were dead. My desperation deepened. If the police, the first responders, the guardians of order were gone, then who was left? And what hope did I have? I stumbled out of the precinct, the weight of the city's emptiness pressing down even harder. My next thought was the hospital. If anyone would be left, if anyone would be trying to help, it would be medical personnel. Or perhaps, if there was some kind of mass illness, they would have been the last to go. I got back into the taxi, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The drive to the city's largest hospital, St. Jude's Medical Center, was a blur of silent streets and ghostly buildings. When I pulled up to the emergency entrance, the automatic doors slid open with a soft sigh, revealing a brightly lit, utterly deserted waiting room. The air inside was sterile, tinged with the faint scent of disinfectant. The triage desk was empty. A pen lay on the sign-in sheet, next to a blank line. The chairs against the walls were empty, perfectly aligned. Hello. I called out again, louder this time, my voice echoing unervingly down the long, silent corridors. Is anyone here? Please. Only silence. The rhythmic beeping of medical equipment from some unseen room. A lonely mechanical pulse in the heart of the deserted hospital. It was a sound that usually signified life, care, urgency. Now it was just another chilling reminder of absence. I walked deeper, past empty examination rooms, their doors ajar. I saw an operating theater, its lights blazing, instruments meticulously laid out on a sterile tray. A single surgical mask lay discarded on the floor, as if dropped in haste. But no blood, no signs of a procedure interrupted. Just nothing. The fear was no longer a cold wave. It was a raging inferno, consuming me from the inside out. My breath hitched in my throat. I felt lightheaded, on the verge of collapsing. This was too much. The sheer scale of it. The utter impossibility. I found myself in a nurse's station, a cluster of computer terminals. One monitor was still on, displaying a patient's chart. Patient Emily Miller. Age 32. Condition stable. Scheduled for discharge 10 a.m. today. The current time on the screen read 10:17 a.m. Emily Miller. She was supposed to be discharged. Had she vanished from her bed? Or had she left the hospital, only to vanish on the street? The thought was a dizzying vortex of unanswered questions. I noticed something else on the screen, a small blinking icon in the corner. An unread email. My heart hammered. Information. A clue. I clicked on it. The email was from the hospital administration, sent out at 9:58 a.m. The subject line was chillingly mundane. Urgent system-wide update. All personnel must read. I opened it. The message was brief, terse. To all St. Jude's personnel. Effective immediately, all non-essential systems are to be powered down. All external communications are suspended until further notice. Personnel are to remain at their current posts and await further instructions. Do not attempt to leave the premises. Do not attempt to contact outside agencies. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Further instructions will be disseminated via internal network only. This directive is to ensure the safety and security of all personnel and patients during an unprecedented, citywide event. Compliance is mandatory. St. Jude's Administration. My eyes scanned the message again, then again. Citywide event. Unprecedented. Do not attempt to leave the premises. Do not attempt to contact outside agencies. This wasn't a sudden, inexplicable vanishing. This was a directive. An order. People were told to stay put. People were warned. But then they vanished anyway. Or rather, they vanished after receiving this message. The timestamp on the email was 9:58 a.m. Emily Miller was scheduled for discharge at 10 a.m. What happened in those 2 minutes? What happened at 10 a.m.? I looked at the clock on the computer screen. 10:17 a.m. 17 minutes after the scheduled discharge. 17 minutes after the email. My gaze drifted to a small, handwritten note tacked to the bulletin board next to the computer. It was a simple reminder, written in hurried, almost illegible script. Remember the code, 10 a.m. The code? What code? Was it a time? A password? A trigger? My mind raced, trying to piece together these fragments. An urgent directive, a warning, a command to stay put, a specific time. And then silence. Utter, complete, terrifying silence. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was an event that someone somewhere had anticipated. Someone had issued orders. Someone had known. And now they were gone too. All of them. A new kind of terror began to bloom in my chest, colder and sharper than the fear of being alone. This wasn't a random act of fate. This was orchestrated. This was planned. And I, Michael, was the only one left to unravel it. The only one left to understand what happened at 10 a.m. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't the hospital's internal machinery. It was deeper, more resonant. It felt like it was coming from beneath the building itself. A low thrum that spoke of immense power slowly, steadily building. My head snapped up, my eyes wide. The air in the room felt heavy, charged. It was subtle but undeniable. Something was happening. Something was still happening. And it was starting right now. The hum began subtly, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to vibrate not just the air, but the very bones in my skull. It started as a phantom buzz in my ears, mirroring the tremor in my hands, but quickly intensified, growing into a deep guttural note that pervaded the entire apartment. My coffee mug, still on the table, rattled faintly. The antique grandfather clock in the hall, silent for years, suddenly let out a faint metallic groan. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a source, a logical explanation. But there was none. This wasn't a faulty appliance or a distant construction site. This was something else. The charged air I'd felt moments ago now felt like a physical weight, pressing down, making it hard to draw a full breath. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer seemed to ripple across the surface of the window pane, directly over the strange symbol I'd found earlier. It wasn't glowing, not precisely, but it seemed to vibrate with an internal energy, the lines of the symbol appearing sharper, almost three-dimensional against the muted gray of the city outside. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the escalating hum. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a sickly, yellowish glow, dimmer than before. The digital clock on my microwave blinked erratically, its numbers scrambling before resetting to a nonsense time. All the electronics in the apartment seemed to be struggling, fighting against an invisible current. Then the whisper started. Not distinct words, not yet, but a faint, multi-layered murmur, like 1,000 hushed voices speaking just beyond the threshold of hearing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around me, trying to coalesce into something intelligible, but always dissolving into an unsettling cacophony. Was it real? Or was this what the isolation was doing to me? Was I finally breaking? I pushed myself to my feet, my legs feeling strangely heavy, as if moving through water. I had to find the source. I had to understand. The hum was strongest near the far wall of my living room, adjacent to my small home office. It wasn't a wall I ever paid much attention to. A plain section of plasterboard adorned only with the framed print of a quiet forest. But now, as I approached, I could feel a distinct vibration emanating from it, a low thrumming that resonated through my fingertips when I pressed my palm against the cool surface. The whispers intensified here, swirling and eddying, almost teasing me with their proximity. I ran my hands along the wall, searching for any seam, any imperfection, anything that might suggest a hidden space. My fingers brushed against the frame of the forest print. It felt unusually warm, almost feverish. I gripped the frame, intending to pull it away to see what was behind it. As my fingers closed around the wood, a jolt, like static electricity, shot through my arm. I instinctively flinched back, my hand tingling. But the urge to investigate was stronger than the momentary shock. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and pulled. The print didn't just come away from the wall. It rotated. With a soft, almost imperceptible click, the entire section of the wall where the print had hung pivoted inward, revealing a small, dark recess. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't a hidden safe or a secret passage to another room. It was a shallow compartment, barely wide enough to hold a single object. And there, nestled within the dusty shadows, was an old leather-bound journal. It looked ancient, its dark leather cover worn smooth in places, the edges frayed. A faint metallic smell like old copper emanated from the recess. The hum, the whispers, the flickering lights, they all seemed to reach a crescendo at this discovery, as if the apartment itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to act. My hand trembled as I reached in, my fingers brushing against the cool, dry leather. I pulled it out, the weight surprisingly substantial. It was secured with a tarnished brass clasp, which easily gave way under my thumb. The first page was blank, save for a date scrawled in faded ink. October 12, 2023. That was yesterday, or the day before. Time had blurred. I flipped to the next page. The handwriting was neat, precise, yet imbued with a sense of urgency, as if the words had been penned in haste. Asterisk, my name is Sarah Chun. If you are reading this, then it has happened. The city is empty. They are gone. And you are alone. Just like I was. Just like I am. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. Sarachan. The name was unfamiliar. Yet the words echoed my own nightmare with terrifying accuracy. This wasn't a coincidence. This was impossible. I read on, my eyes devouring the meticulously penned script. Asterisk. I don't know how long it's been since I woke up to the silence. Days? Weeks? Time has lost all meaning. Every street, every building, every apartment empty. I've checked everywhere. No one. Not a soul. It's like the world just stopped, and everyone vanished. The only thing they left behind was the hum. Asterisk. The hum. The very sound vibrating through my apartment right now. I glanced up, the faint shimmer over the window symbol catching my eye. Asterisk. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. The hum, the low thrumming sound, it's always there. A constant pressure behind my eyes. It feels like it's coming from everywhere, but also from inside me. It gets louder sometimes, especially when I'm near certain places, like the old clock tower downtown, or the abandoned subway stations, or places where the symbols appear. Asterisk. Symbols. My gaze instinctively snapped back to my window. The symbol. The one I'd found etched on the glass. It wasn't just a random act of vandalism. It was a clue. A marker. Asterisk. The symbols are everywhere if you know where to look. Scratched into walls, etched onto abandoned cars, even burned into the dried leaves in the park. They aren't all the same, but they share a common geometry. A disturbing symmetry that feels unnatural. I tried to draw them, to replicate them, but my hand always falters. It's like my mind rejects their true form. Asterisk. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This journal, this woman Sarah-chan, she had experienced this before. Or was experiencing it with me. Was she still out there? Or was this a record of what would happen to me? I flipped more pages, the entries growing increasingly desperate, the handwriting less precise, more frantic. Asterisk. I started hearing the whispers. At first, I thought they were just the wind or the city settling, but they grew clearer. Not words, not exactly. More like suggestions. Ideas. They tell me things. They try to guide me. But where? And to what? Asterisk. My own whispers, the faint murmuring I'd heard just moments ago, returned with a renewed intensity. They were closer now, almost brushing against my ear, making the fine hairs on my neck stand on end. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but they persisted, an insidious chorus. Asterisk. They are watching. I know it. Feel it. Every moment. Every step. The hum is their way of seeing. The whispers are their way of speaking. And the symbols are their way of marking. Marking what? I don't know. But I have a terrible feeling it's marking us. Asterisk. The journal fell open to a new page near the very end. The ink here was darker, fresher, looking as if it had been written only hours ago. The handwriting, though still neat, was shaky, betraying a profound terror. Asterisk. I've learned more. I wish I hadn't. The hum isn't just a sound. It's a frequency. A resonance. It's what they use to interact, to transition. It's how they move between places, dimensions. I don't understand it all, but I know this. The hum intensifies when they are preparing, when they are ready to take another. And the symbols, they are anchors, points of entry. Asterisk. A cold dread spread through my chest, gripping my heart. Points of entry. The symbol on my window. This wasn't a warning about what had happened. This was a warning about what was about to happen. Asterisk. I think I know what the broadcast was. The nursery rhyme. It's a lure, a distraction, and the voice. They are gone. You are next. It wasn't a threat. It was an observation, a statement of fact. They don't threaten. They just take. Asterisk. My mind reeled. The radio broadcast. The child's voice. The chilling words. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of despair. The final entry, scrawled across the bottom of the page, was barely legible, as if the pen had been snatched away mid-sentence. Asterisk. The hum is reaching critical mass. I can feel it in my very core. They are here. They are coming for me. I can't hide anymore. But I found something. A way. Not to stop them, no one can stop them. But a way to maybe understand. A way to see what they truly are. It's in the forgotten places. In the echoes. Find the source. Find the original resonance. It's not in the city. It's under it. Under the old subway. The one they sealed off. The one with the forgotten tracks. The last place the hum truly began. Go there. But be careful. Once you know, you can't unknow. And they will know you know. They will be waiting. Asterisk. The words ended abruptly. No signature. No final playa. Just the chilling instruction, pointing me into the very heart of the forgotten city. As I finished reading, the hum in my apartment reached an unbearable pitch. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into near darkness before surging back with an unnatural, blue-white intensity. The whispers were no longer whispers. They were a cacophony of distorted, overlapping voices, pressing in on all sides, clawing at my sanity. And the symbol on my window, it wasn't shimmering anymore. It was glowing, a faint, internal light, pulsing with the rhythm of the accelerating hum. The journal slipped from my numb fingers, clattering to the floor. My eyes were fixed on the window, on the glowing symbol. Sarah-chan had gone to the forgotten subway, and she hadn't returned. Now the hum was here. The whispers were here. And the symbol was a beacon, a doorway. My next move was clear, horrifyingly clear. I had to go to that subway. I had to find the original resonance. Because whatever was happening, whatever they were no longer just an unseen force. They were here. And they were ready. The chilling certainty of my next move was a cold knot in my stomach. I had to go to that subway. I had to find the original resonance, the epicenter of this silent apocalypse. Because whatever was happening, whatever they were no longer just an unseen force. They were here. And they were ready. The thought of descending into the underground, into the very heart of the city's forgotten pathways, filled me with a primal dread. But the alternative, staying put, waiting for whatever was out there to find me, was far worse. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing in the few remaining rations, a flashlight, and a multi-tool that felt pitifully inadequate against an unknown enemy. The heavy metal door of the convenience store groaned shut behind me, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast, silent street. The air outside was sharper, colder than I remembered it being just minutes ago. A thin, almost imperceptible mist seemed to cling to the empty avenues, blurring the edges of skyscrapers into a ghostly haze. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, every distant flicker of light a potential threat. My senses were on high alert, hyper-tuned to the absence of sound, the stillness that was more terrifying than any scream. I kept to the center of the streets, away from the storefronts and alleyways where anything could hide. My eyes scanned the rooftops, the windows, the darkened entrances of apartment buildings. Nothing. Just the vast, oppressive emptiness. As I walked, a subtle change began to manifest. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, but a pressure. A low, thrumming vibration that started in my feet and slowly worked its way up my legs, settling in my chest. It was the resonance, growing stronger with every block I traversed towards the subway entrance. It felt like the city itself was humming a morbid, silent tune. My teeth began to ache, a dull, persistent throb. The air itself seemed to thicken, making each breath feel heavy, metallic. I reached the familiar, ornate entrance to the old subway station. The wrought iron gates, usually bustling with commuters, stood ajar, leaning precariously as if pushed open by an unseen force. The descent into the station was like stepping into a tomb. The air grew immediately colder, damp, and heavy with the scent of aged concrete, stagnant water, and something else, something indescribable, like ozone mixed with decay. The faint light from the street above barely penetrated the gloom, quickly swallowed by the cavernous space below. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, dancing across faded advertisements, graffiti-scarred walls, and the skeletal remains of turnstiles. The resonance here was no longer a hum. It was a physical force. My entire body vibrated with it, a low, incessant tremor that made my vision blur at the edges. The whispers, which had been distant and indistinct upstairs, now clawed at the edges of my hearing. They weren't words, not in any language I knew, but a cacophony of overlapping, guttural sounds, like rocks grinding together, or dry leaves rustling in a gale, but with a horrifying, underlying intelligence. It was a language of pure discord. I found the main platform, a vast, echoing expanse of cracked tiles and grimy benches. The tracks lay dormant, glinting dully in my flashlight beam, stretching into the inky blackness of the tunnels. The resonance was strongest here, emanating from down the tracks deeper into the earth. It pulsed, rhythmic and unsettling, like a giant unseen heart beating beneath the city. My head pounded in sync with it, a relentless drum against my skull. Then I saw it. At the far end of the platform, near the mouth of the tunnel, a distortion. It wasn't a physical object, but a shimmering in the air like heat haze off asphalt on a summer day. Except this was in the cold, damp dark. It pulsed with the resonance, expanding and contracting, a window into, I didn't know what. It was translucent, allowing glimpses of the tunnel beyond, but warping them, twisting them into impossible angles and colors. And within that shimmer I saw movement. Not clear shapes, but shadows deeper than the darkness, shifting and coalescing. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the source. Or at least the gateway. I had to get closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee back into the comparative safety of the empty streets, but the compulsion was overwhelming. I moved forward, one hesitant step after another, my boots crunching on loose gravel and bits of debris. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, pressing in on my mind, threatening to unravel my sanity. They seemed to be coming from the distortion itself, a chorus of alien voices, not speaking to me, but through me, attempting to twist my thoughts, to dismantle my very perception of reality. As I drew nearer, my flashlight beam pierced the shimmering distortion. For a fleeting instant, I saw something within it. Not a creature, not a person, but a structure. A latticework of impossibly thin, dark tendrils, interwoven with a strange bioluminescent material that pulsed with an internal light. It was organic and artificial at the same time, utterly alien, yet somehow familiar in its intricate complexity. It was like looking into the inverse of a nervous system, and from this structure, the tendrils seemed to extend outwards, not physically, but as extensions of the resonance, permeating the very air, vibrating the concrete, singing through my bones. But there was more. On the platform directly in front of the distortion were marks. Scratches on the concrete, gouges in the metal track. Not random vandalism but deliberate patterns. Circles within circles, intricate geometric designs that seemed to vibrate with a faint, internal light of their own. They were symbols, clearly, and they were fresh. Someone or something had been here recently, performing some kind of ritual, some kind of preparation. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the tunnel, making me jump. It wasn't the sound of the resonance. It was a distinct, sharp sound like metal snapping. My flashlight beam darted towards the sound, down the tunnel, away from the distortion. There, just beyond the reach of the platform, I saw it. A section of the track, not just gouged, but melted. The steel rails were warped and twisted, fused together in places, as if subjected to immense localized heat. And beside it, lying on the gravel, was a small cylindrical object. It glinted under my light. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a phenomenon. This was deliberate. This was active. I approached the melted section of track, my eyes fixed on the object. It was a small metallic cylinder, no bigger than my thumb, with intricate etchings along its surface. It felt warm to the touch, even in the cold air. As I picked it up, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse emanated from it, a tiny echo of the larger resonance that saturated the station. Felt like a piece of the distortion solidified. But then the whispers intensified, no longer a cacophony, but coalescing into something sharper, more focused. A single dominant thought began to press into my mind, not in words but in pure, overwhelming intent. It was a feeling of observation, of being scrutinized, of being measured. And then the distortion at the end of the platform pulsed violently, expanding, contracting, and for a terrifying second, it seemed to focus on me. The shadows within it elongated, solidified, hinting at forms, shapes that were utterly wrong, alien. They were reaching. They were aware. A low, guttural growl, not from the whispers but a real physical sound, emanated from the tunnel beyond the distortion. It was deep, resonant, and filled with an ancient, predatory hunger. The air grew heavy, thick with an unbearable pressure, making my ears pop. The small cylinder in my hand vibrated furiously, humming in protest. I spun around, my flashlight beam sweeping wildly, convinced something was behind me. Nothing. But the feeling of being hunted was overwhelming, immediate. The growl came again, closer this time, echoing off the tunnel walls, not from the distortion, but from within the tunnel itself, beyond it. My mind raced. The distortion was a gateway, a window, but the growl, that was something else. Something that had already passed through. Something that was now here, in the physical world, moving through the dark. My eyes snapped back to the melted track, to the small metallic cylinder in my hand. This wasn't just a place of resonance. This was a point of entry. And this object, this was a tool. A device. A weapon. Then I saw it. A faint, almost invisible trail like a snail's path, leading from the melted track, past the symbols and heading deeper into the maze of tunnels. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but the resonance in the air, the slight shimmer, betrayed its presence. Whatever had caused the melt, whatever had left this device, it had moved on. And it was heading further into the city's veins. The growl sounded again, closer, stronger. The shadows in the distortion were no longer just shifting. They were reaching. And the whispers were a deafening roar in my mind, screaming of ancient hunger, of a vast, alien intelligence that had finally found its way in. I clutched the metallic cylinder, its pulses now frantic against my palm. The city wasn't empty. It was being occupied, and I had just stumbled into their staging ground. The metallic cylinder pulsed wildly, a frantic heartbeat against my palm, confirming the terrifying truth. The city wasn't empty. It was occupied, and I had just stumbled into their staging ground. A cold dread, far deeper than any fear I'd known, gripped me. This wasn't a human threat, not a rogue government experiment or a cult. This was something fundamentally other. The very air seemed to thicken, pressing down with an invisible weight, a silent hum vibrating through the concrete floor beneath my feet, resonating deep within my bones. It was the sound of a colossal, unseen machinery, operating with an unimaginable purpose. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting frantically around the cavernous space. The intricate patterns on the walls, initially dismissed as abstract decoration, now seemed to throb with a faint, internal light, shifting and swirling like alien hieroglyphs. They weren't just patterns, they were conduits, energy pathways, perhaps even a language I was utterly incapable of comprehending. The entire structure, this enormous, forgotten building, was alive, humming with an energy that wasn't meant for human senses. My breath hitched. The pulses from the cylinder intensified, now accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine that only I seemed to hear. It was a warning, a desperate cry against the encroaching presence. I had to get out, but where? The way I'd come and felt miles away, through a maze of dark corridors and dusty rooms. And what if they were already out there? What if the entire city, every single street, every building, was part of this vast alien mechanism? I pressed myself against a cold, metallic pillar, trying to regulate my ragged breathing. My mind raced, desperate for a plan. This wasn't a situation I could fight my way out of. This wasn't something I could even understand. All I knew was that I was an intruder in a place of immense, silent power, and my presence was probably registered the moment I crossed their threshold. A shudder ran through the building, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floor and up my legs. Dust, fine and ancient, rained down from the ceiling. The pulsating patterns on the walls brightened momentarily, casting an eerie, shifting glow across the vast chamber. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. This wasn't just a staging ground, it was an active one. I peered through the gloom, straining my eyes for any sign of movement, any shape that wasn't part of the building's alien architecture. Nothing, only the endless, silent, humming machinery. But the feeling of being watched, of being scanned, was overwhelming. It was as if every atom of my being was under intense scrutiny, analyzed by something that saw beyond flesh and bone. The cylinder in my hand suddenly went cold, then searing hot, its frantic pulses now a steady, agonizing throb. A flicker of light, not from the walls, but from within the cylinder itself, caught my eye. A tiny, almost imperceptible glyph, identical to some of the smaller patterns etched into the wall, glowed faintly on its surface. It was a connection. This cylinder wasn't just reacting, it was interacting. What was it? A key? A diagnostic tool? Or something far more sinister, something that had been waiting dormant for someone like me to stumble upon it? Had I been drawn here, not by chance, but by some unseen force? The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I had to be strategic. Blind panic would get me killed. I took a deep breath, trying to force clarity into my fogged mind. The first priority was to understand what I was dealing with, even a little. The second was to find an exit, any exit. I moved cautiously, hugging the shadows, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. I scanned the massive room, my gaze sweeping over the colossal machinery, the intricate conduits, the glowing patterns. There was a section of the wall, deeper within the chamber, where the light seemed to concentrate, where the patterns coalesced into a dense, swirling vortex of energy. It was drawing my attention, an irresistible pull. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee in the opposite direction, but a deeper, more primal curiosity, a desperate need to comprehend, urged me forward. The cylinder in my hand pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost like guidance, drawing me towards that focal point. Was it a trap? Or was it leading me to an answer? I crept closer, my eyes fixed on the swirling light. As I approached, the air grew heavy, thick with an acrid metallic scent, like ozone mixed with something ancient and organic. The hum intensified, a low thrum that vibrated in my teeth. The heat from the cylinder became almost unbearable, forcing me to shift it from hand to hand. And then I saw them. They weren't moving. Not in the traditional sense. They were suspended. Clusters of them, translucent, gelatinous forms, pulsating faintly with an internal light, like enormous bioluminescent jellyfish. They hung from the ceiling, connected to the swirling energy vortex by thin, crystalline tendrils that pulsed with the same alien light as the walls. My blood ran cold. These were the occupants, or at least a manifestation of them. They weren't solid, not in any way I understood. They seemed to be composed of pure energy, contained within a fragile, shimmering membrane. Each cluster was roughly the size of a small car, their forms amorphous, constantly shifting and reforming in slow, graceful undulations. I stared, mesmerized and horrified. There were dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, suspended in the vast chamber, all connected to that central vortex, all subtly pulsing in unison with the building's hum. It was a nursery, a hive, a vast living network. The ancient hunger, the alien intelligence. It wasn't just here, it was birthing itself here. Or perhaps it was merely manifesting here, drawing energy from somewhere unknown to power its insidious growth. As I watched, one of the tendrils connected to a particularly large cluster began to glow brighter, its light intensifying, becoming almost blinding. The gelatinous form at its end began to contract, then expand, its internal light flaring. A ripple went through the entire network of suspended forms, a silent, collective anticipation. I instinctively recoiled, a choked gasp escaping my lips. This wasn't just a staging ground, it was a birthing chamber. And something was about to emerge. The cylinder in my hand suddenly vibrated violently, almost leaping from my grasp. The glyph on its surface flared, burning with an intense blue light. And then a sound, not from the cylinder, not from the creatures, but from the building itself. A low, resonant thrum, like a colossal tuning fork being struck. It wasn't a hostile sound, not aggressive, but impossibly deep, ancient, and filled with a terrifying sense of will. It was a communication, and the cylinder was reacting, perhaps even responding. My mind reeled. Was this cylinder a part of their technology? Was I holding a piece of the very intelligence that had taken over the city? Was it a beacon? A tracker? Or something I couldn't even begin to imagine? The blue light from the glyph on the cylinder pulsed, then projected a faint, shimmering image onto the floor in front of me. It was a map, a schematic, not of this building but of the city, and on that map, numerous points of light, identical to the glyph on the cylinder, began to appear, scattered across the urban grid. They weren't static. They were moving, slowly, deliberately converging. They weren't just in this building. They were everywhere. The city wasn't empty because people had left. It was empty because they had been cleared. Cleared for this. For the manifestation of these things. For the expansion of this alien consciousness. And those moving points of light on the map? They were the occupants. The physical manifestations, the ones I was now seeing suspended in this chamber, were merely the beginning. They were spreading. The implications crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a local phenomenon. This was an invasion, silent and insidious, unfolding right under humanity's nose. And the city, my city, was ground zero. The colossal thrum from the building intensified. A wave of pure sonic energy that pressed against my eardrums, vibrating through my chest cavity. The gelatinous clusters above me pulsated faster, their tendrils glowing brighter. The central vortex of energy swirled with renewed vigor, drawing power, drawing something from the very fabric of reality. I had to move. I had to warn someone. But who? How? And what could anyone do against something so vast, so utterly alien, so completely integrated into the very environment? I was just one man, clutching a device that seemed to be both my only clue and my gravest danger. I turned to flee, my eyes searching desperately for an exit, any exit. But as I spun around, a shadow detached itself from the gloom behind a towering piece of machinery, a shape unlike anything I had seen before. It was sleek, dark, and moved with an unnatural fluidity, like liquid darkness given form. It was not one of the suspended clusters. This was something else, something active, something that had been waiting. It moved with impossible speed, silent as a whisper, coalescing from the shadows directly into my path. My heart leaped into my throat. It was tall, slender, and seemed to ripple at the edges, absorbing the ambient light. It had no discernible features, no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth obsidian surface that reflected nothing. And then from its center, a single glowing glyph, identical to the one on my cylinder, pulsed into existence, radiating an intense, cold blue light. It was looking at me, or rather, it was sensing me, and it was sensing the cylinder in my hand. I was trapped. The staging ground was no longer just a place of discovery. It was a cage, and I was now face to face with one of its guardians. I was trapped. The staging ground was no longer just a place of discovery. It was a cage, and I was now face to face with one of its guardians. The column of liquid light pulsed with an unnerving rhythm, a silent, powerful thrum that I felt deep in my chest. It wasn't just looking at me with some unseen eye. It was scanning me, dissecting my every molecule, my every fear. Its luminescence intensified, casting my trembling shadow long and distorted against the metallic walls. The air around it crackled, not with electricity, but with an almost palpable energy, a silent hum that seemed to vibrate the very bones in my skull. My hand gripping the strange cylinder felt suddenly heavy, a magnet drawing an unstoppable force. The entity's focus was absolute, unwavering. I could feel it, an invisible tether between the light and the object I held. It wasn't curiosity. It was something far more primal, more possessive. This wasn't a creature. It was a sentinel, and the cylinder was its charge, or perhaps its master key. The cylinder itself began to react. A faint warmth spread from its cool metal casing into my palm, then a subtle vibration, like a distant engine humming to life. It grew stronger, a low thrumming that resonated with the pulsating light before me. A soft, internal glow emanated from within the cylinder, a pale, ethereal blue that mirrored the entity's own brilliance, almost as if they were two parts of the same circuit, now finally connected. Then a tendril of that liquid light detached from the main column, slow and deliberate, extending towards me. It wasn't aggressive, not a strike or a lunge. It was an exploratory probe, a curious finger reaching out, directly for the cylinder. There was no sound, only the silent, inexorable advance of pure energy. My breath hitched. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to drop the thing, to disappear. But my feet were rooted to the spot, my muscles locked in a primal fear. This wasn't an attack designed to harm. I realized with a chilling clarity. This was an attempt at retrieval, or perhaps an attempt at reconnection. The entity wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to reclaim what it considered its own, or what it was programmed to protect. And I, a trespasser, had stumbled upon its most vital secret. As the light tendril drew closer, barely an arm's length away, the walls of the staging ground seemed to shift around me. Not physically, but perceptually. The shimmering metallic surfaces, which I had initially perceived as mere architectural features, now pulsed with a faint, synchronized glow, mirroring the entity. The exits, the pathways I had used to enter, seemed to subtly recede, their openings blurring, becoming less distinct. The entire structure, I now understood, was not just a facility. It was an extension of this guardian, or perhaps a prison designed by it. I wasn't just in a room with a sentinel. I was in its lair, and it was closing its invisible gates. A desperate surge of adrenaline finally broke through my paralysis. I yanked my arm back, pulling the cylinder away from the inquisitive tendril. The light entity didn't recoil, but its pulsating rhythm intensified, the blue glow from the cylinder flaring brighter in my hand. It was a challenge, a defiance, and the guardian registered it. The tendril retracted slightly, then reformed, thicker, more resolute, and extended again, faster this time. It wasn't a chase, but a deliberate, almost surgical movement. It knew what it wanted. It knew I had it. My mind raced. I couldn't fight this thing. It wasn't corporeal in any way I understood. I couldn't even reason with it. But the cylinder was reacting. It was the key. As the tendril advanced once more, I instinctively tightened my grip on the cylinder. And then something extraordinary happened. The blue glow emanating from the cylinder in my hand suddenly pulsed, not with the gentle thrum it had before, but with a sharp, almost painful burst of energy. It was like a miniature flashbang, but without sound. The effect on the light entity was immediate and profound. The advancing tendril flickered, briefly dissipating like smoke, and the main column of light wavered, its intense luminescence dimming for a split second, as if momentarily overloaded or disrupted. It was a jolt, a momentary disruption in its otherwise perfect, unyielding presence. This was my chance. Without a second thought, I turned and sprinted. My feet pounded against the metal floor, the sound echoing hollowly in the vast chamber. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from the pulsing light, away from the silent, relentless guardian. I scrambled through the maze of conduits and machinery, my heart hammering against my ribs. Each turn I took, I expected to see the column of light, or another tendril blocking my path. But it wasn't there. The entity seemed to be bound, or at least constrained, to the central area where I had found the console. It was a territorial guardian defending its core, but the entire staging ground still felt alive, aware of my presence. The faint glow in the walls seemed to track my movement, a silent, omnipresent eye. The air shimmered with that residual energy, a constant reminder of the entity I had just provoked. I could feel its awareness, a pressure on my mind, a silent pursuit even without a physical presence. It was a psychological hunt, a feeling of being watched, contained. I burst out of the main chamber and into a narrower access tunnel, the darkness here a welcome respite from the oppressive brilliance. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed myself harder, adrenaline coursing through me. I didn't stop until I reached the entrance I had used, the one that led back to the desolate streets. I pushed open the heavy camouflage door, stumbling out into the cool, silent air of the city. The pale moonlight felt like a gentle balm after the blinding internal glow of the staging ground. I gulped down breaths of the empty city's air, leaning against the cold brick of the adjacent building, my body shaking uncontrollably. I glanced back at the entrance, half expecting the liquid light to spill out, pursuing me. But nothing. The door remained a solid, unremarkable facade, blending seamlessly with the wall. The city outside was just as I had left it, empty, silent, devoid of life. Yet I knew now it was anything but empty. My gaze fell to the cylinder still clutched in my hand. It was no longer glowing, no longer vibrating, but it was still warm, radiating a faint residual heat. I stared at it, a profound realization dawning on me. This wasn't just a piece of advanced technology. It was a key, a weapon, a disruptor. It had momentarily stunned the Guardian, given me the window to escape. It was the only thing that stood between me and whatever intelligence protected this city. The implications were staggering. The city wasn't abandoned, it was guarded. The emptiness was not a sign of decay, but of deliberate preservation. And these guardians, these beings of pure energy, were not just lurking in the shadows. They were integral to the very fabric of this place, perhaps even its architects. The staging ground, the console, the massive power conduits. It was all part of a larger system, a meticulously maintained operation. But for what purpose? And why had they left the city seemingly untouched, a ghost town frozen in time, while secretly operating beneath its surface? I had broken through a barrier, breached a perimeter. I had taken something vital from them, and now I was sure they knew I was here. They knew I had the cylinder. The silent city was no longer just a mystery to be solved. It was a battlefield, and I was armed with a single enigmatic artifact against an unknown, powerful enemy. I had to get back to David and Jessica. I had to tell them, this was bigger than anything we could have imagined. The city wasn't just empty, it was waiting, and I had just woken something up. I had to get back to David and Jessica. I had to tell them, this was bigger than anything we could have imagined. The city wasn't just empty, it was waiting, and I had just woken something up. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I scrambled away from the pedestal. The air in the museum, once still and heavy with dust, now felt charged, almost humming. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old building amplified. I didn't dare look back at the illuminated artifact. The ancient power it held, the sleeping entity it contained, felt like a tangible presence breathing down my neck. I moved with a desperate urgency, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the vast, silent halls. I retraced my path through the darkened exhibits, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive gloom. The statues and displays, which moments before had been mere curiosities, now felt like silent sentinels, their unseeing eyes fixed on my hurried retreat. The exit from the museum felt like an escape from a trap that was just beginning to spring shut. I burst out into the deserted street, gulping down the cool night air. The city, bathed in the eerie glow of the persistent streetlights, seemed to hold its breath. The profound silence that had always been its defining characteristic now felt less like an absence and more like a deliberate hush, a collective holding of breath before an inevitable storm. My car was parked a few blocks away, a beacon of normalcy in a world gone utterly bizarre. I reached it in a dead sprint, fumbling with the keys, my hands trembling. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound that momentarily pushed back the encroaching dread. I drove fast, probably faster than I should have, through the desolate avenues. Every intersection felt like a gamble, every turn a potential ambush. The sense of being watched, of having disturbed an ancient slumber, was overwhelming. My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what I'd uncovered. This wasn't a viral outbreak, not a natural disaster. This was something orchestrated, something ancient, something alive. The city was a construct, a prison, a tomb, and I had just opened the lid. When I finally pulled up to the abandoned bookstore where we'd agreed to meet, the familiar sight of David and Jessica's car brought a wave of relief so intense it almost buckled my knees. They were inside, huddled near a makeshift lantern, looking up expectantly as I burst through the door. Their faces, etched with worry and fatigue, were a welcome sight. "Michael, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost," Jessica said, her voice laced with concern. David, ever the pragmatist, was already on his feet. "Did you find anything? Any leads?" I slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the cavernous space. "Worse than a ghost," I gasped, leaning against the door trying to catch my breath. "Much, much worse." I walked over to the table, my legs feeling like lead. I needed to tell them everything, but where to even begin? The words tumbled out, disjointed at first, then gaining coherence as the sheer terror of it all solidified in my mind. The city. It's not empty because people left. It's empty because it's a cage. A prison. I started, my voice hoarse. Or maybe a chamber. For something old. Something cosmic. David and Jessica exchanged a confused look. "What are you talking about, Michael?" David asked, his brow furrowed. "The museum. It's not just a museum. It's a vault. I found it. An artifact. A sphere of polished obsidian, pulsing with light, radiating a strange energy." I explained, trying to convey the otherworldly feel of the object. "And it was connected to everything. To the city's architecture, to the patterns we've been seeing." Jessica's eyes widened. "The symbols you mentioned? The ones on the buildings?" "Yes, but more. I found texts. Ancient texts hidden away. They spoke of a great silence. A watcher from the void. They described this city as a binding. A place built to contain something. Something immense. Something that fed on awareness. On consciousness itself." I could see the disbelief warring with dawning horror in their eyes. David, ever the skeptic, tried to interject. "Michael, are you sure you're not just—" "I'm sure, David. Felt it. The energy." The text described an event, a great slumber where the entity was contained. And the city was built around it, designed to keep it dormant. The grid, the power lines, the resonance we detected. It's all part of a massive ancient containment system. Jessica, whose historical background made her more open to such concepts, leaned forward, her face pale. "A containment system? Like a prison for a god?" "Something like that. And the artifact? It's the key. Or the lock. It was glowing, Jessica. And I think I woke it up. Or at least I disturbed it." A profound silence descended upon the bookstore, heavier than the one outside. The flickering lantern cast dancing shadows that seemed to mock our fragile sense of security. The implications of my words hung in the air, cold and menacing. We weren't looking for survivors anymore. We were caught in an ancient conflict, pawns in a game we didn't even know existed until moments ago. David finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. "So the power grid, the one I've been trying to tap into, it's not just for electricity. It's for this? To keep something asleep." "Exactly," I confirmed, rubbing my temples. "The city's infrastructure isn't for human comfort. It's a circuit, a mechanism. The entire city is a giant, elaborate machine, and we've been poking around its vital organs." Jessica stood up, pacing restlessly. "And the great silence, that's why everyone disappeared? Not because they died, but because their consciousness was absorbed or suppressed." The texts weren't entirely clear on the specifics of how the entity feeds or what happens when it's active, I admitted. But they implied that its awakening would mean the end of thought and light. An eternal void. The city's purpose was to prevent that. David, ever the one to look for solutions despite the terrifying new reality, pulled out his laptop. "All right, if this is a containment system, there must be a way to understand it, to control it. If the artifact is the key, what does it do? Does it seal it away, or unleash it?" The text suggested it was meant to be a ward or a barrier, I replied, trying to recall the intricate symbols and phrases. But it also seemed to be a source of power, a conduit. It felt alive. So we have an ancient entity, a city designed to be its prison, And an artifact that's either the lock or the unlock switch, Jessica summarized, her voice steady despite the obvious fear in her eyes. And you think you've stirred it? A cold dread settled in my stomach. I know I did. The air changed. The shadows deepened. It felt like the city itself became aware of me. Suddenly, a faint, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the floor. It was too low to be a car, too consistent to be a structural creak. It was a deep, resonant thrum, like a distant, massive engine slowly coming to life. David's head snapped up, his fingers flying across his keyboard, checking his sensors. What was that? Jessica whispered, her eyes darting towards the door. David's screen flickered, displaying a complex array of graphs and readings. His face went ashen. The city's energy grid. It's fluctuating. Not randomly. It's organizing. And there's a resonance spike. Coming from everywhere. It's like the entire city just took a deep breath. The hum intensified, growing subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet undeniably. It was no longer just a vibration. It was a sound, a low guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the city. The streetlights outside flickered once, twice, then settled back into their constant glow. But the brief interruption was enough to send a jolt of terror through us. It's awake, I breathed, the words catching in my throat. It's listening. We had stumbled into something far grander and more terrifying than a mere abandoned city. We had found a sleeping leviathan, and in our curiosity, we had nudged it awake. The silence of the city was over. Now it was beginning to hum, to thrum, to breathe, and we were trapped inside its awakening lungs. The artifact, the glowing obsidian sphere, was no longer just a discovery. It was our only hope or our ultimate doom. We had to understand it, and fast. Before the city's ancient occupant fully opened its eyes. We had to understand it, and fast. Before the city's ancient occupant fully opened its eyes, the immense tremor that had just rocked the chamber faded, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the erratic pulses of the obsidian sphere, which now glowed with an unnerving internal fire. It hummed, a low resonant frequency that vibrated not just in the air, but in the very bones of the city, echoing in our chests. Dr. Eris Thorne, his face a mask of intense concentration, reached out a hand, not quite touching the sphere, but hovering centimeters above its surface. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were now wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's alive," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Not in the biological sense, but it's responding. It's communicating." Michael, ever the pragmatist, gripped his rifle tighter. "Communicating what, Doctor? And with whom?" He glanced around the cavernous chamber, his gaze darting to the colossal, dark walls that seemed to press in on us, the intricate carvings now seeming to writhe in the pulsating light of the artifact. Suddenly, a series of faint, rhythmic thrumming sounds began to emanate from deep within the city, a sound like a colossal heart beating below the bedrock. It grew steadily, a slow, inexorable rhythm that made the very ground tremble beneath our feet. This was different from the previous tremors. This was deliberate, organic. Jessica's breath hitched. "It's getting stronger. The city, it's waking faster." Her eyes were fixed on the sphere, which now seemed to be mirroring the city's pulse, its light intensifying with each thrum. Dr. Thorne didn't seem to hear her. He was completely absorbed, his gaze locked onto the obsidian. "The city isn't just a structure, Michael. It's an organism, a vast ancient consciousness. And this sphere, it's its central nervous system, its memory, its voice." As he spoke, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer began to emanate from the sphere, forming a hazy, translucent field around it. Emily whimpered, pressing herself closer to David. "I don't like this. I feel cold, like something's watching us." David wrapped an arm around her, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "It's okay, Emily. We're together." But his own eyes were wide, scanning the shadows that danced along the walls, convinced he saw movement where there was none. The air itself felt different now, thick and heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang. Dr. Thorne, oblivious to our growing fear, slowly extended his hand further, his fingertips brushing the shimmering field around the sphere. A jolt, not of electricity but of pure data, seemed to course through him. His eyes rolled back slightly, and a low groan escaped his lips. He wasn't in pain but processing something immense, overwhelming. Doctor. Michael moved forward, concern etched on his face. Are you all right? Thorn didn't respond immediately. He stood there, rigid, his body vibrating with the same energy as the sphere. Then his eyes snapped open, blazing with an unnatural light. He spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, older, imbued with a strange resonance that made the words echo in the chamber. It remembers everything. The entity, it was not born here. It came from beyond the stars. A cosmic parasite seeking a host, a world to consume. This city, it was built to contain it. A prison disguised as a sanctuary. We stared, dumbfounded. The words poured out of him, a torrent of ancient history and terrifying revelation, as if a dam had burst inside his mind. The builders, they were not human. An advanced species long gone, who understood the true nature of the void. They trapped it here, in the heart of this world, beneath layers of rock and psychic wards, powered by this very artifact, the obsidian sphere. It's a containment matrix, a psychic anchor, a limiter. The thrumming from the city intensified, becoming a deafening bass note that reverberated through the ground, shaking loose pebbles from the ceiling. A faint ethereal light began to pulse from the very walls of the chamber, mirroring the sphere's glow. The air grew heavier, pressing down on us, making it difficult to breathe. It was as if the city itself was inhaling, drawing us deeper into its awakening lungs. But the containment is failing, Thorn continued, his voice still that chilling, resonant echo. Eons of dormancy, the slow decay of the wards, and our presence, our intrusion. We are the catalysts. We have woken it. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones. You mean this whole time we haven't just been exploring? We've been breaking it out. Thorn's head slowly turned, his eyes fixed on Michael but seeing beyond him. The sphere, it is showing me flashes, images, a vast, formless consciousness dreaming in the dark. Now it stirs, feels us. It remembers the surface. It hungers. Jessica pointed a trembling finger at the sphere. What are those symbols? Intricate, glowing glyphs were now swirling across the obsidian surface, shifting and reforming like a liquid language. They pulsed with an internal light, too complex and alien to decipher. They are the keys, Thorn murmured, his voice returning to his own, though still laced with the residual echo. The controls, the wards. The sphere is showing us how it was sealed, and how it can be sealed again, or how it can be fully released. The implication hung in the air, thick with terror. We hadn't just found an artifact. We had found the trigger to either global salvation or global annihilation. What is it exactly? David asked, his voice barely a whisper. This entity? Thorn closed his eyes for a moment, visibly struggling with the influx of information. When he opened them, they were filled with a profound despair. It is not a creature of flesh and blood as we understand it. It is a concept, a hunger made manifest, a sentient void that devours all light, all life, all consciousness. If it fully awakens, if it breaches the surface, it will consume everything. Not just our world, but all worlds it can reach. It is a plague on the cosmos. The gravity of his words was crushing. We weren't just lost explorers anymore. We were standing at ground zero of an existential threat. The tremors intensified, now accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very bedrock beneath us. The ethereal light from the walls grew brighter, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. The sphere, it's also a weapon, Thorn gasped, clutching his head as if the information was too much to bear. The builders, they created it not just to contain but to fight, to bind, to sever its connection to this dimension. But it requires a sacrifice, a focal point, a tremendous surge of energy, channeled through a living conduit. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with horror. A living conduit? What does that mean? Thorn looked at us, his gaze lingering on each of our faces, a terrible understanding dawning in his eyes. It means one of us must become the anchor, the conduit, to channel the sphere's power, to reactivate the ancient wards, to push the entity back into its prison, or to destroy it if that is even possible. The growling from the depths of the city swelled into a monstrous roar, shaking the entire chamber violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ancient stone walls, and pebbles rained down on us. The light from the walls pulsed erratically, threatening to blind us. Michael raised his rifle, scanning the crumbling chamber, his mind racing. There has to be another way, Doctor. We can't just sacrifice someone. Thorn shook his head, his face pale. The sphere is clear. The energy required, the connection needed. It must be a living bridge. And time we have very little left. The entity is almost fully awake. It is reaching out. It knows we are here. Feels the sphere. It wants its freedom. As if on cue, a section of the massive wall opposite us crumbled inward with a deafening crash, revealing a cavernous, glowing maw of darkness that pulsed with an ominous purple light. From within, a chilling non-Euclidean sound emerged, a sound that twisted the very fabric of reality, driving knives of ice into our minds. It was the sound of something unimaginably vast, ancient, and utterly alien waking up. The city was no longer just breathing. It was roaring, and the roar was directed at us. The artifact, the glowing obsidian sphere, was not just a discovery. It was our only hope or our ultimate doom, and now it demanded a price we were not prepared to pay. We had to make an impossible choice, and fast. Before the city's ancient occupant fully consumed us all, the air thickened, pressing down on us like a physical weight. Not just the oppressive silence of the empty city, but something ancient, hungry. It seeped into our lungs, chilled our bones, whispering in the deepest corners of our minds. We felt it now, the tendrils of the city's occupant, not just draining the city but us. A profound emptiness, a siphoning of our very essence, stealing our will, our memories, our sense of self. David stumbled, clutching his head, a low moan escaping his lips. Emily's eyes, already wide with terror, swam with a dazed confusion. Jessica instinctively pulled her close, her own face etched with desperate fear. I stared at the obsidian sphere, its dull surface now pulsing with a faint, internal light, mirroring my frantic heart. This wasn't just a rock. It was a nexus, a fulcrum in a battle older than time. We had to understand its language, its demands, before we were all reduced to hollow echoes. It's trying to get inside my head, David gasped, pulling out pieces. Jessica, ever intuitive, closed her eyes. It's not just pulling, David. It's feeding. On our fear, our confusion, our history. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto mine. The sphere, it's a counterforce. Dormant but waking because we are here, because it is here. A low thrum began to emanate from the sphere, a vibration resonating deep within our chests. Not a sound we heard with our ears, but with our souls. Images flickered. Vast, empty landscapes, crumbling structures, an immense shadow. A glimpse into the entity's past, its destruction, its insatiable hunger. Then a coherent thought, a shared understanding bloomed in our minds, cold and clear as ice. The occupant was an ancient consciousness, not born of flesh and blood, but of pure destructive will. A parasite that had consumed entire civilizations, leaving barren husks and forgotten memories. This city was not built by people. It was a colossal prison for this entity. And the sphere, the obsidian sphere, was the key. Both the lock and the ultimate weapon. To re-engage the containment protocols, it required a price. A catalyst, not raw energy, but a conscious, sentient will. A willing surrender. A fragment of a soul. A significant portion of one's very identity, willingly offered. The realization hit us like a physical blow. To save ourselves, one of us had to give up a part of ourselves that was irreplaceable. To sever a core identity, to become someone fundamentally different. This was the impossible choice. "No," Emily whispered, tears streaming. "No, I can't. I don't want to forget." David, reeling, searched for a loophole. There has to be another way. Some kind of power source, a generator, anything but this. "There isn't," Jessica said, her voice heavy. "The entity thrives on chaos, on fear. Feeds on our minds. The sphere needs a pure, conscious act of will. A sacrifice of self, not merely of life." She looked at each of us. My mind raced. Who could make such a sacrifice? We were all terrified. We all wanted to escape, to reclaim our memories. But the entity was closing in. My own memories frayed, blurring into haze. We were losing ourselves anyway. This might be the only way to retain anything. I don't know if I can," I admitted, hoarse. Losing who I was, becoming a stranger to myself, was almost as terrifying as being consumed. Who would it be? How do we even choose? David's eyes darted between us, fear mixing with chilling practicality. Emily, who had been shrinking, suddenly looked up. Her eyes, though tearful, held a strange, fragile resolve. I feel it more, she whispered. The emptiness. It's like it's reaching for me first. Emily, no, Jessica cried, pulling her closer. You're not doing this. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Jessica, I said, the cold truth settling. Emily was right. She was the most vulnerable, perhaps the most sensitive, but she was also the youngest. To ask her to make such a sacrifice, it was monstrous. What if we all contribute a piece? David suggested desperately. A smaller memory from each of us? Would that be enough? Jessica shook her head. No, it needs a focal point. A single powerful act of conscious surrender. A complete severance of a significant part of one's core identity. The entity's presence intensified. A deafening psychic scream tearing through our minds. Shadows danced erratically. The air grew impossibly cold, my breath fogging. The floor beneath us vibrated. This was it. Emily, pushing away from Jessica, took a hesitant step towards the sphere. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. I think I know what it needs, she said, her voice gaining surprising clarity. It's not just memories. It's the attachment to them, the emotional weight, the love. A horrifying understanding dawned. The entity fed on memories and emotions. The sphere needed a sacrifice of that very bond. To love deeply, and then willingly sever the connection to those cherished memories, to that love. To give up the feeling of it. Emily, stop. I lunged, but Jessica was faster, grabbing her arm. You can't do this. You'll lose everything. But what if I lose it anyway? Emily's voice was heartbreakingly soft. What if we all do? At least this way something might survive. Someone might remember. Her eyes met mine, filled with a profound, terrifying acceptance. I remember my parents. The warmth, their laughter. David teaching me to fish. Jessica braiding my hair. Michael always looking out for me. A single tear traced her cheek. I don't want to forget those. But if it saves you, if it saves us, maybe I can give up the feeling of them. The pain of missing them. The joy of having them. It was a sacrifice more profound than death. To willingly strip away the emotional fabric of your being. To become an empty vessel. My heart ached. But in her eyes I saw not just fear but courage born of despair. Are you sure? Jessica whispered, choked with tears, holding Emily's hand. Emily nodded, a tremulous smile. I am. It's better than letting it take everything. With a final, agonizing glance, Emily reached out, placing both hands on the obsidian sphere. A searing blue light erupted, enveloping her. She gasped, a sound of pure agony, as the light intensified, pulsing violently. We recoiled, shielding our eyes, unable to look away. The psychic scream of the entity reached a crescendo, a soul-shattering shriek. The ground bucked violently, dust and debris raining down. It was fighting back. But the sphere, fueled by Emily's selfless sacrifice, pulsed brighter, stronger. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light receded. The psychic scream died down to a low guttural growl deep within the earth. The air, though still heavy, no longer held that oppressive, draining weight. Shadows retreated, the intense cold lessened. We rushed to Emily. She stood there, motionless, hands still on the sphere, which now pulsed with a steady, deep blue glow. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring straight ahead. Her face was calm, almost serene, but utterly devoid of emotion. Just nothing. Emily, Jessica whispered, trembling, reaching out. Emily turned her head slowly, her gaze passing over Jessica, then David, then me, without a flicker of recognition. Her lips parted, her voice flat, emotionless. The occupant is contained. For now. The chilling finality of her words hung in the air. The entity was gone or trapped. But the cost? Emily was alive, but the girl we knew was gone. Her memories, her emotions, her very self offered to the sphere. The city was saved, perhaps. But we were left with a hollow victory, and a terrible silent question. What had we truly unleashed? The sphere, radiating a faint hypnotic glow, was no longer just a prison. It was a monument to a sacrifice, and a new unsettling mystery. We had survived the entity, but at what cost to our humanity? And was the containment truly permanent? Or had we merely reset a ticking clock, creating a new, more insidious threat? The empty streets of the city felt even more desolate now, mirroring the emptiness in Emily's eyes. The silence that followed was not the triumphant hush of victory, but a hollow, echoing void. The last tendrils of the whisper had recoiled, compressed into the heart of Michael's device, leaving behind an absence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Emily stood amidst the ruins of the observation deck, the hum of the containment unit the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. The frantic energy that had coursed through her, the terrifying clarity the whisper had sometimes afforded, was gone, replaced by a stillness so absolute it bordered on numbness. Michael, his face streaked with sweat and grime, let out a ragged breath that sounded like a sob. He slumped against a console, his eyes fixed on the device, a complex array of pulsating lights and intricate wiring. "It worked," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. "We did it, Emily. It's contained." But Emily couldn't feel the relief. The emptiness in her eyes was not just a reflection of the desolate city outside, but of something deeper, something within her. The whisper had been a monstrous, destructive force, but it had also, in its own twisted way, been a connection. A horrifying, unwelcome link to every consciousness around her. A constant, overwhelming chorus. Now that chorus was gone, and the world felt infinitely smaller, colder, and utterly terrifyingly alone. The immediate aftermath was a blur of activity. Teams in full hazmat suits descended, meticulously scanning the city, confirming the absence of the whisper's active presence. The containment field around the city remained, a necessary precaution, turning the once vibrant metropolis into a ghost town, a macabre museum of a forgotten terror. The few survivors, mostly those who had been in deep underground bunkers or outside the initial radius, were slowly brought back, bewildered, traumatized. They remembered the panic, the fear, the sudden, inexplicable urge to scream, to run, to hurt. But the source, the insidious voice, that was mercifully vague in their minds, a nightmare receding into the fog of memory. Emily and Michael were debriefed endlessly. Their accounts, often conflicting in their subjective horror, were pieced together by a global scientific consortium. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. The whisper was gone. Humanity had faced an existential threat and, through ingenuity and sacrifice, had prevailed. The headlines screamed of heroism, of a global triumph. Michael was lauded as a savior, his name synonymous with the miraculous containment. Emily, however, remained largely in the shadows, her unique connection to the whisper making her an object of cautious study rather than outright celebration. She was a living testament to its power, a lingering echo of its devastation. Weeks turned into months. The city remained untouched, a silent monument to the crisis. Emily stayed, often wandering its empty streets, the only living soul in a concrete jungle. She felt drawn to it, to the lingering psychic residue of what had transpired. It was here, in the deafening quiet, that she began to notice it. Not the whisper, not the cacophony, but something far more subtle, more insidious. The world outside, supposedly safe, began to change. Reports filtered in, at first dismissed as anomalies, then as emerging trends. A subtle creeping malaise. It wasn't a disease, not a virus. It was something far more fundamental. People were losing their capacity for deep connection. Conversations became superficial, devoid of genuine emotion. Art, music, literature. They seemed to lose their spark, becoming technically proficient but emotionally sterile. Empathy, that essential glue of human society, seemed to wane, replaced by a detached, almost clinical indifference. It started small. Jessica, Emily's friend from before the whisper, called her one day. Jessica had been outside the city during the crisis, safe but worried sick. Now, her voice on the phone was flat, devoid of the warmth Emily remembered. She talked about her job, her daily routine, but there was no real joy, no genuine complaint. When Emily tried to delve deeper, to connect on an emotional level, Jessica simply changed the subject, her tone polite but distant. It was like talking to a ghost of her former self. Michael too felt it. He was initially dismissive. Post-traumatic stress, Emily. Global anxiety. We just survived something unprecedented. But even he started to notice the shifts in his own behavior, and in the scientific community around him. Collaboration became less about shared passion and more about cold, hard data. Debates lacked the vibrant intellectual sparring he once cherished, devolving into sterile exchanges of facts. He found himself increasingly isolated, not by choice, but by a subtle, almost imperceptible barrier that seemed to rise between him and everyone else. Emily remembered her visions, the brief, terrifying moments when the whisper had allowed her a glimpse into its true nature, or perhaps its distortion of it. It had been a collective consciousness, a raw, unfiltered stream of human thought and emotion, amplified to a destructive degree. What if, by containing it, by forcing it back into a singular, compressed state, they hadn't destroyed it but merely changed its form? What if the whisper wasn't an external entity at all, but an emergent property of human consciousness itself, a latent capacity for extreme interconnectedness? And by containing it, they had severed that connection, not just the monstrous amplification, but the very root of it. The city, once a hub of human interaction, was now a perfect mirror. Empty streets, silent buildings, devoid of the very essence that made them alive. And the world outside, though bustling with people, was becoming just as empty, street by street, mind by mind. The whisper had forced a terrifying, unbearable connection. Its containment had wrought an equally terrifying, unbearable disconnection. Emily walked through a deserted park, the leaves crunching under her feet. She stopped at a playground, the swings swaying gently in the wind, a silent testament to laughter and joy long gone. She closed her eyes, trying to feel something, anything. The overwhelming fear, the desperate hope, the furious anger, emotions that had once been so vivid, so exhausting. Now there was only a dull ache, a profound sense of loss for something she couldn't quite name. It was the absence of resonance, the quiet hum of shared humanity that had always existed, even before the whisper had amplified it into a scream. The containment device, Michael's Triumph, was still active, deep within the city's sealed core, constantly monitored. It pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, holding the compressed consciousness of the whisper captive. But what if it wasn't just holding it captive? What if, in its attempt to suppress the overwhelming collective, it was also suppressing the underlying mechanisms of human connection, of empathy, of shared experience? The silence was no longer a relief, it was a symptom. The absence of the whisper's chaotic roar had been replaced by a new kind of silence, a far more insidious and pervasive one. This was the silence of souls adrift, of minds unmoored from the collective human experience. It was the silence of a world where people could no longer genuinely hear each other, truly feel each other. Michael, years later, a celebrated but increasingly solitary figure, would often revisit the sealed city. He would stand at the perimeter, gazing at the empty skyscrapers, the vacant windows reflecting only the cold, indifferent sky. He had saved humanity from an unimaginable horror. But at what cost? He had silenced the scream, only to usher in the whisper of profound, inescapable loneliness. He had contained the monstrous connection, but in doing so, had he inadvertently unleashed the true terror of absolute disconnection? Emily remained in the empty city, a voluntary exile. She no longer sought answers, no longer fought the numbness. She was a living relic, a monument to a choice made in desperation. She sometimes wondered if the whisper, in its original terrifying form, had been a distorted warning, a desperate cry from a part of humanity that craved connection so deeply it broke. And now that part was gone, suppressed, contained. The streets remained empty, but the emptiness had spread far beyond the city limits. It had seeped into homes, into offices, into the very fabric of human interaction across the globe. The world was safe from the whisper's rage, but it was slowly, imperceptibly, dying from its absence. And Emily, alone in the city of empty streets, was perhaps the only one who truly understood the terrible irony. Humanity had won the battle against a monster, only to become a shadow of its former self, forever isolated, forever alone. The silence was absolute, and it was deafening.